Hey everybody, welcome to our panel this morning for Digital Graffiti. We are very happy to have you all here. I am your host, Jeffrey Platt. I am one of the judges here, and I've been a participant in Digital Graffiti now for 8 years. A lot of my background is in live events and live production design. I got very heavily involved in digital media about 8 years ago, actually. When I first started coming to DG, I was working with a lot of very high-end media server products, mainly used on a lot of concerts and concert touring, along with being involved with a lot of projection mapping installations and projection mapping based art. And then from there, I ended up working on the Las Vegas Sphere for a period of 3 years, and I helped design all the video playback systems that are used both on the inside and the outside of the Sphere. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm going to actually have our panelists kind of go from my stage left to stage right, just doing a little introduction of themselves to you and give a little bit of context on who they are and why they might be up here. So Luke, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, I'm Luke. I'm an interactive immersive designer and developer. This is my 5th year at DG now. I have a laser mapped piece, number 30. Check it out. I also do VJ visuals and laser shows for live music, DJs, techno, anything live entertainment.
Awesome. John, I think everybody kind of...
Yeah, hi. I'm the curator, John Collette, and I'm functionally unemployed, basically. So I do this so I have something to do.
Hello.
We're going to have a whole lot of questions for him.
I'm David Bennett. I'm a creative director for broadcast and live events in Nashville. And also, I've been coming to Digital Graffiti since 2014 and sort of come from a motion design background and a fine art background. And yeah.
So, hello, everyone. I'm Kati Angelov, and I'm a professor at Cypress College, where I teach projection mapping and motion design and digital arts and whatnot. And this is my 2nd year at Digital Graffiti. It's awesome.
Good morning. My name is Devin Spear. I am not an artist, but I am a creator. I think artists are entrepreneurs at heart, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started 6 companies, a lot of tech companies, a lot of digital media companies, but always on the product side, selling places like real estate or selling products. And I'm really inspired to be here. This is my first time, so I look forward to chatting with more of you.
He and I are going to have some real deep conversations. I've got some pretty good ideas that I might want to pitch to him later on. Well, pardon?
There's no bad ideas.
There are bad ideas. Trust me. Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank you, the panelists, of course, for being here. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some creative processes. We might be talking about some work-life balance. Have you guys ever heard of that? I mean, artists don't really know work-life balance, kind of ish. So we're gonna kind of whip things up, but I'm gonna actually keep things pretty simple. So I'm just gonna kind of rotate. A lot of panels are kind of organic and get kind of messy. So we're gonna kind of go and have a little bit of process this time, which is something that also I think falls into our work streams as artists creating different pieces. So Luke, we're gonna start with you again, just to keep things simple. So give us a little bit of insight on some of the things that have excited you inside of the field and some of the things that have really inspired you to become the artist that you are today.
Yeah, for sure. I think in my process, I think a lot of it comes from designing for interactive installations for brands. And I think I'll be working on specific like networks. A lot of it's programming inside of Touch Designer. I think that's a lot of like where my inspiration comes from, and just figuring out different kind of ways to do different things. And then I'll see that and then kind of put that aside, make a note of that as maybe something that I could bring back into the art side of things. whether it's a GLSL thing or like just a cool way of, even like doing replicators or like Python or something. If I'm doing it for more like boring corporate installation, I'll be like, oh, I won't bring this back into my art later on. And that's definitely what I have in my piece this year as well.
So what's really kind of driven you? What's really inspired you to kind of go in the direction that you've gone into?
Yeah,
there's so many different
I think
facets of art and so many different ways to
that's
create
true.
media.
Yeah, I think that side of it comes from like the techno scene and doing the VJ shows and the laser shows and seeing, well, I guess like what I want to see on the screen at these shows, what other VJs are doing, and then how can I, like I was just saying, how can I tie that back into more of a installation, but maybe not so corporate. Maybe, let's play with it a little bit. Let's bring elements of the live shows and kind of what inspires me back into more setup.
Awesome. John, you've got quite the history, especially inside of art meets the digital world, from teaching to being an artist yourself, and of course curating events like these. So with your diversity and with your background kind of building up to an event like Digital Graffiti, how do things kind of play out from your perspective of being an artist, creating art, and then getting to a place like this, for example, and placing those art pieces within the festival to kind of create it into what it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. A big part of the work here is to.
I don't have bad questions.
No, I just like to stroke your ego at the beginning of my answer. You're fabulous, Jeffrey, and also
thank you. Jeffrey matters.
A big part of it is kind of providing a conduit for people, and that's. I mean, I've done film and video. Like, I'm pretty old now, and I've done it. I'm looking back, it's about 43 years that I've been pretty much doing this every day that I wake up, with, great sort of purpose. And so, I've done a lot of different kinds of production and, exhibited things when I was doing my MFA like 30 years ago, and all these different sorts of experiences. But one of the things, because I've moved between industry roles and academic roles are always a way of sort of, to me, finding a bridge for people to transition into what happens after that study process. You're kind of working with things and you're developing ideas, and it's like, okay, how do we connect you with another conduit? And I think that's important if you provide a link or a conduit for people to make another step. And so a lot of digital graffiti is you sort of notice that there's a great diversity of work here, and that's really intentional. That it's not, I mean, we have absolutely top of the game international artists who are doing, festivals all over the world all the time. And we also have kids from the local high school and the elementary school who've never done anything. And part of so for me, that process, I went in March when I'm scoping out the festival and met with the schools and showed them what projection mapping looked like. Did a little town hall with them for an hour in their assembly hall and said, look, don't be afraid. This is cool. Here's what we're going to do. And they're like, oh, okay, I see. And then it's a little bit daunting for a teacher if they're not experienced in this work to sort of mentor the kids through it. So I'll record tutorials on Vimeo and say, this is how we go through the process. I'm giving you a template. This will support you enough to get your work here. And I think that's kind of an example, if it makes sense, of how you connect those kids to something in the event, where the event's not just look at me. It's a very communal sort of experience, and it's a very spatial experience. And I think that's that idea of because people talk about experience, but it's just left up. It's like engagement or content. Like, I freaking hate those words. I hate content. It's a meaningless word. It's for people who shift boxes, like someone who hates.
I feel really bad now. I'm going to have to get off the stage.
No. But when people say, when they're talking about their process and they say, we have to put the content here, it's like, I've never heard someone who's like a director get up and say, what are you doing this morning? They're going to work on a film. They're like, oh, I'm making content. No one thinks like that, because painters don't say, I'm going to my studio to make content. And this word is like something which really aggregates people's creative labor into just the formless mush, which is kind of what Instagram does. Instagram turns everything into content. And so this is quite, I think it's kind of different, because when you talk about engagement or you talk about experience, it's quite granular and it's very diffuse. Everyone here has a different experience or a different kind of way in. So you're kind of just setting up a series of scenarios where people can come, and lots of the public can come, and lots of people can present things here, and it produces a, you know, that quality of engagement is that something experiential happens in the person, and it's spatial and it's hard to describe. You can't say, oh yes, it was exactly this, because when you go back and someone says, what was it like? So I don't know, it was cool. There was stuff everywhere and lots of people, and you know, you don't find the words. And I think that's good, because that's very much grounded in experience rather than in, you know, a theory or a philosophy or a statement. So part of what I want to do is get people, sometimes first-time artists who haven't exhibited, and they're like, I'm really nervous. It's like, don't be, because this is a good place to do your work. You know, I want people to see themselves in the experience, and then to walk away and think, you know, especially those kids, you saw them here last night, and they're standing with their parents in front of their work, and they can say, oh yeah, I did that, I was here. And it becomes a conduit for them to see themselves. Like for one of those kids, that'll be a turning point in their life where they take a different path. And unless you open that up to people, it doesn't fulfill its potential, I think. So a big part of this for me is about kind of just creating those scenarios for lots of different people and having conversations with people. And, you know, I talk to pretty much all the artists, and I get my hands on all their work. And, you know, there are like probably 4 people here who I don't have to work that intimate. Like Nico, I just like, you're good. Nico's good. I'm not gonna tell you anything, you know, Luke. I'm just like, you know, Luke knows exactly what he needs to do. So, but everyone else, we're going to talk through that process, and just little things like how will I stage it? What will, you know, and for each of those particular events, those little places, it's about sort of serving the artist and sort of saying, well, what could be good about, you know, how do you want this to look? Sometimes it's like sending out templates to different people, making sure that they know that their work can be mapped. There's probably a dozen people that we work with just to help them realize the form of the building. So yeah, a lot of that for me is about connecting. I'm sort of like connective tissue, if that makes sense, between the world and the space.
I was going to say, maybe we need to get Nicolo up here too. A surprise. David.
Hello.
Hi.
Good question. Good question.
Absolutely. So David and I share a lot of backgrounds. I think definitely share a lot of commonality on the technical side of things, and some of our creative processes seem to kind of fall in line. We just spoke about community, and that's something that I'm actually going to get to you about next. But David, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the technical sides, because I think it's quite fascinating, especially on some of the processes of the way that you create your media and your art. Can you speak a little bit about how the technology and basically your emotions kind of play into the pieces that you create, and some of the thought processes that you have as you're kind of connecting technology to what you end up ultimately output?
Sure. I'll try and get that into a concise answer.
Maybe I shouldn't be winging this.
Well, I mean, it's a broad question, but first background. You know, as I mentioned, I've been working in television and live events for close to 30 years, and you know, started out as a motion designer, and evolved from that into my current role as a creative director, managing multiple designers to create visuals for live events, branding for live events, sort of the complete experience from, you know, something on social media leading well into it, and then you know, creating. I think there's something really magical about a live event where you're completing the experience for people in a space, and it is an ephemeral experience where, you know, much like Digital Graffiti, it's something that you really have to be present to experience it. And I think it's almost like a a new kind of emotion, a new kind of sensation where you don't have words to really encapsulate it. I mean, every time I come to Digital Graffiti, it's like I want to sort of have a package that's like, okay, I experienced it all, and it's impossible. Like every time you walk in any direction, you're going to see something differently. You're going to feel it differently, and I think it's kind of your sensations on overload. Like there's so much stimulus in every direction, and I think a part of that is technology driven. I mean, everything relies on electricity in some sense to give it life, but then it's also the audience that sort of brings significance to it, and so that's just a little bit of preamble to get to the technology. So in the work that I'm doing here, I've used sort of a process of repeating things through different destinations, or like start with video synthesizers that are initially creating imagery, like it might be simple geometry, lines and shapes, and then those are reacting to sound, reacting to electrical voltages, different waveforms that are creating sort of a cyclical rhythm or polyrhythms. We'll take that and then grab frames out of it, feed that into an AI to describe it and try to understand what it's seeing and get something wrong. And then take that description and feed it to another AI to further misinterpret what it thinks is being described, and sort of continue to repeat this passing of information to different places, and then ultimately use that as a prompt to then drive a visual and get something that doesn't match what started, but is kind of
Still related.
yeah, revealing the grit a little bit of what it's passed through, and then from there taking and creating motion out of it, assembling the motion in After Effects or Premiere, and then feeding that back through the video synthesizer ecosystem, and just kind of it's going back to college days. I loved working with photocopiers and like the idea of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. So ultimately, like I could have started out with an image of my keys on the photocopier, and by the end it's a noise pattern that you don't see where it came
Or Luke's
from.
keys that are on the ground.
Well, yeah, and then from there you've got like something new, but it's like you get the fingerprints of all of the different materials, and a similar process with sound, and I think it's interesting, like for me, like with this being a work-life balance themed talk, I think work-life balance is maybe a myth, or
I was going to actually start to allude to it next.
I'm teasing.
Now that you're okay, so you're giving a little
subject,
like foreshadow.
I think it's a work in progress. Like always, like kind of curiosity and necessity sort of drive what I'm doing, and I'm always sort of hungry to learn. And if I don't know it, anything is possible. And like you were saying, I mean, I think always you drop in and give the right bit of information to go that direction. And as far as coming back to the work-life balance part of it, I feel like I fail miserably at that. It's especially in like a live event situation, like maybe you've got a 6-month timeline and there's no urgency at the beginning other than just sort of making some initial commitments to a creative path, and there's not the rush. But once you get up to, okay, the event is happening, there's no shifting the event. You've got 2 weeks to get it done. So then it's around the clock, all energy goes there, and it's sort of like a vision quest where you lose all track of reality, and hopefully you have the support of all of those around you, knowing that you are going to be a zombie.
That you're going to be swallowed into a void.
That's right. But I think there's something magical about that experience of sort of sharing that with a group of people, and kind of having a common experience of like we're going to the same destination. And I don't know, in the managing of work-life balance, I think modularly, like the technology, kind of driving different modes. So it's like
I love that analogy.
I'm going to work on something.
I love the
contained.
metaphor of treating life like different types of modules that you can tap into.
Well, yeah,
or
and then it's like
shift around.
I think that's where the balance comes in. If you recognize my focus today is on this particular task, I know it plugs into a whole bigger set of tasks, but really to make it manageable, just limit it to these decisions rather than, maybe you're thinking 4 steps down the line, but I don't know.
Maybe you'll level out at some point. Katsi. Did I get that right? Katsi?
It's like coffee,
Katsi.
but it isn't.
Katsi.
That's, yeah. It's, well, I guess I do.
I guess it
some.
depends on the time.
It's always because I teach in the morning, so it's totally necessary.
Speaking of work-life balance, and you've got your plate quite full. I mean, you're teaching, and you're a mentor, and you're an active artist, also participating in different expositions, and that process has got to be quite demanding. But I before we kind of get more onto the balancing part, we can kind of touch on that a little bit. I wanted to get some insights as to kind of how you differentiate your work life as a professor and as a mentor to being able to also do these projects that are passion projects for you and that invigorate you and inspire you to kind of keep pressing forward as an artist. And I guess there is some balance, of course, in there.
Has to be.
But it would be really interesting to kind of hear your perspective on how you keep those separated and how you kind of manage your life in terms of being able to be creative, but also be creative and kind of guide emerging artists or students and mold them into kind of the proper ways of moving forward and having a successful career.
So to be honest, the whole creative process and the creative part of me, it's not a problem. It bubbles up. It needs to come out. It's a thing that needs to happen. And it's actually very frustrating if you don't get to it, if you don't get to make things. Things appear in my brain and they must be made. And whether it takes, that's the beauty of it. Unlike
this
you,
must be done.
I don't have, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have those deadlines unless I really want to enter like a projection show or something, but it has its own process and it needs to develop itself. Teaching, at the other hand, is, it's like a forever thing. I do cut off my email checking, though, every Friday, 5 p.m. And I tell my students, sorry, this is a mental health situation. I work until Friday, 5 p.m. Monday, 8 a.m., I'm back again. Don't ask me questions. You'll live. You'll be fine. And so they learned, and this is working very well for me. I do a lot of things outside of the teaching load because that's what happens in the night, right? Like projection does not happen from 8 to 5. It happens from 6 to 10, whatever. So, but those I look at as, I don't know, like part of that growth that has to happen for the students and for myself. So it works out perfect. I do feel really, really, really incredibly tired every time we're done, but we just had an event and, just to take out those projectors, you guys know very well, those little large venue projectors, 100 kilogram or whatever, how big they are, they're insanely big. And then you roll them out and then you do the thing and then you roll them back in and you shouldn't lose anything in the dark. And you have to leave before the sprinklers go off. So all of these things.
I had the sprinklers go off on me the other night. I was not a happy camper.
No, it's like a nightmare. So I think it takes discipline. You just really have to say, again, this is where I cut off one, and this is where I do the other.
What about your creative processes? Like, because you're going to have, of course, creativity and processes in the way that you teach, but you're also going to have creative processes in the way that you're a little bit more liberal and the way that you express yourself through your own art. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So with teaching, so I always tell my students that basically I am that person that didn't know how to turn on a computer and who was really intimidated by technology. So I approached the teaching process from like, this is okay, you can do it. If I did it, you can also learn how to do it. And I break down the big things into smaller steps so they don't have an overwhelming anxiety from it. Mostly. I'm sure you could ask my students how they felt about it.
What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Is she on point? Yeah? Okay.
But they're very kind, so they're not going to criticize me in front of others.
Okay, I'll pull you guys aside later on, and we'll do one-on-one interviews.
I come from an experimental animation background, which is really funny because now I have to teach technology and I have to teach mainstream technology. And I got to that because I'm an immigrant and I had to eat. I always say this, like, yeah, it's awesome to do experimental animation, but when it comes to a paycheck, it's really difficult to get a paycheck with it. So I can learn that part. I can implement things that I know. We talked a lot about with John, like, textures, photographing, I don't know, tree bark or whatever you see, or the sidewalk here at Alys Beach, because it's beautiful. All the little marine creatures fossilified in it, the dead life in it. So
happy thoughts.
Happy thoughts, I know. Well, this has been around for ages. We're so little speckles of life. It's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, it reminds us. It's a good reminder.
Yeah.
It's also a good relationship to the present.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
You did.
I don't know. Good. Okay.
You did. Devin.
Yes.
Welcome
you're a good moderator.
Welcome to the party.
I'm glad to be here. I'm impressed with all the creativity.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's,
yeah.
I mean, each one of you have said something I could just riff on for a long time. I unfortunately, I do create content. I mean, maybe that's a blasphemy word, but it's expression. And then I think you just said if there's an idea, it has to be built. I think that's for me is harnessing attention deficit disorder, because I have a million ideas per millisecond, and you choose which one do you want to pursue. And anyway, what's your question? I'm just rambling.
It's great. I was like, I don't even need to ask him anything. He's just going to roll on, and we're already in. No, I was going to actually ask you something that was just directly related to what you had already started saying, and it's kind of funny because I can just about leave and not even moderate the panel. You guys are already a few steps ahead. I wanted to kind of get your grasp and your idea on your creative process, from your industry, because you're working in an area that is quite different from the rest of our panelists, especially on the product and technology side, and kind of the creative outlets that you have and the way that you kind of work your way through that, how things get selected.
Right.
And then how you engage with your clientele to be able to produce, because ultimately you're going to be producing the output and the product of what your customer is seeking.
You're right.
Coming from a product guy myself, that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, and some of these early companies were tech companies. We did a lot of trade shows in the 1990s, and in those days, there was a company called Barco, and we had to line the red, green, and blue.
Small, tiny.
So we'd be there with
AV
these patterns, moving the red, green, blue guns, and the technology was always an enabler to the message, and maybe the medium is the message. But today, to give you a little context as to why I'm one of the judges, is my day job, my full-time job, is with this company called Over Above. We're a marketing strategy firm. My title is Chief Innovation Officer. So I think about ways that our agency helps our clients. Alys Beach is a client. We're working with them on the capitalistic aspect of selling real estate. So we're helping them find new home buyers. And this whole event, it drives a lot of home buyer interest. I mean, they do, indirectly, brand awareness. They sell real estate because of digital graffiti. But even in that world of selling things, great salespeople and great marketers that are trying to help sales organizations The great ones are just doing one simple thing. They're transferring emotion. I mean, this can be true with pharmaceutical sales or automotive sales, anything. If you're a really good sales professional, you're just trying to get the buyer to feel what you feel about the product or the service. And places like this make it easy because you experience it. But I think all of you guys, and what I saw last night, that's all you're doing is you're transferring some emotion that you had in your mind to this digital canvas, and I'm trying to interpret that, and like metaphysically, these are just rods and cones in my retina that are trying to process the electrical signals. It's funny, there's electrical signals pushing the image out, and it's the brain using electrical signals to process it. Like, whoa, everything's electrical. But so the process, I think, in companies like ours, and any big strategy marketing firm or media agency, is trying to understand where content, digital media, and this is obvious stuff. It's social media, it's web content, it's print media, sometimes analog stuff, billboards. Where does that connect with the story of the place and relate to interest of the right audience? This is not a neighborhood for everybody. So we're trying to connect the right content to resonate, almost like really at a heartfelt level where they can see themselves living here. So that shows up in great photography and great copy. But my side passions, in addition to my work at Over Above, are driven by this. We're in an unprecedented phase of human evolution. In case you haven't realized it, there's a link in my bio in the mobile app. Check out some stuff I write about, especially about AI, disruptive technology, artificial intelligence. So now we're at this place where almost anything you can imagine can be manifested digitally so much faster than ever before. And that speed is accelerating. It's happening quicker and quicker and quicker. So the challenge might be, how do you balance all these powerful tools and maintain that thing about emotion? And I have no idea what the future is going to hold. I just know even a year from now, nothing will be like it is today. The rate of change is so exponential. But humans are humans, and I think that's the constant.
And I think you just struck on one of the most important things, is that humans are human and machines are machines. No matter how we separate them or differentiate them, that's always going to be the case, is that we are organic and they are not organic.
Right. And generative AI is fooling us. Mark Zuckerberg said in an interview last week that he wants people using the Meta AI platform to think of the Meta AI as their personal friend, their coach, their advisor, their counselor. And some of that gets very Orwellian. I mean, some of that is dystopian to me. I don't like that, but I do like the power if you know how to harness it, because it's just a more effective chisel or hammer, right? If it's a tool, how do you use it for your benefit?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to say, I think that this question of AI is a big one about how you take something in the world and how you balance it with creative practice. And there's not a person, I think, who's working image-based practice who's not aware of what's going on with AI and doesn't see different things that are happening. And I think there's a strong distinction with what we have in the show, that people can use the tool, but it becomes a tool and it becomes much more recombinant with other processes. You can't just, like, there was a whole period where people would post something from Midjourney, they'd type in a prompt and they'd say, here's my art. It's like, well, that's a low bar. Because there's nothing actually more than just the simple process of asking for something to appear and it automating that process of labor. And I think there's two questions here, that creative practice is a kind of conceptual labor, but it's a very difficult conceptual labor because you have to struggle with it, because what it is to be true to your own interests, your own process, the kind of things you want to manifest, that's one. It's a genuine struggle, and I know from balancing creative work and teaching or, commercial work and things over years, that going back to that place where you sort of empty yourself out and sort of sit with your muse, that's really important. But that with AI, it's designed to replace human labor. You know, when it says artificial intelligence, it's trying to produce intelligent labor, and what we call the creative class or the creative practice of writing or of making an image. You know, you can see vast swathes of illustration which are now just emptied out because the commercial use of illustration is simply someone asking for a picture of some type, and they're like, why the hell would I bother with a person when I can just get this AI to spit out a bunch of stuff good enough for what I want? You know, I had a conversation 3 years ago with a friend who's a tech entrepreneur and he'd moved back to Australia from Silicon Valley. He said, are you using ChatGPT? I said, oh, you know, yeah, I've had a look at it. And he said, I'm using it for all my copy. I do all this copywriting. I used to hire people. I just get it. And I think that's, you know, sure, it's a chisel. But it's also, I think there's a real problem because and Zuckerberg, for all of his sort of billionaire imprimatur that, oh, Mark Zuckerberg's successful, he's a freaking moron. Like he's literally one of the dumbest people ever to open his mouth in public. And every time he does it, he shows what a shallow thinker he is.
We may want to edit that for the record.
No, I'm sorry, because he wields this enormous influence and he's asinine. He says, oh, we're trying to connect people. He's not. He's trying to, you know, get people to create through their labor his platform. Facebook's nothing if you don't go on it. And every time you use it, you're incrementally creating the thing that he draws value from.
In all social media, you are the product.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So a lot of these things come back to the process of what's labor. How does it produce an effect? You know, and for people here, there's a deliberative, you know, I see the way people work, and there's a conceptual or a process-based deliberative process that's really embodied in the work, and then that goes somewhere else. But I think we've got to be really careful about this idea, you know, and if people are using AI as part of that process, go ahead. But it's not just like I punch something into a, you know, Mid-Journey and here it is, you know, and literally there is a kind of torrent of hyperbole on Instagram of people showing you, you know, here are 3 AI tools you should know about, and it's really how to automate everything that people would do on social media. So it's like an Ouroboros, you know, Instagram's eating itself, showing you how to make it all with AI.
Just for the record, it took us 48 minutes, and I've been trying so hard to divert us from getting into talks about AI.
Well, can I ask, and you guys, you're more artistic creators than I am, but how is, and again, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misuse, but we're in the early stages.
We are definitely in the early
stages. How would
stages.
generative AI anything, image generation, text generation, I'm using AI to code apps and websites that I don't have any business building, but they're incredibly awesome. And I just have to guide it, and it streams out, you know, JavaScript.
Can we do me a favor? Can we actually tailgate a lot of these questions more towards the end of the panel, and we can maybe spin off from there?
Yeah, I was gonna say the whole.
I just want to be aware of trying not to get this panel to end up going down a full-blown AI.
But no. So
I know it's important.
It's a question about how you work, like how you connect that, and is it part of life? Yes, it is. I mean, like if I was sort of saying, well, curatorially, we're not going to have any AI, that'd be moronic, because it's like saying we're not going to use Photoshop, or anyone who uses, you know, some other tool or a filter. I don't care. But people, like, I think people are really good at connecting, and I think it's a topical question because where this is happening, it's happening so fast around us that we can't ignore it, but you have to be smart about connecting it back to that link between this is happening in the world and people are working over here producing work. And if you recognize, like, I can look at people's work and I know I see either there's a lot of work gone into this and how it's produced, or it's just a simple thing they've spat out of a computer. And I think that's one of the big things about, you know, we as artists are dealing with a very different world than we were. And I think you're right, Devin. 12 months ago, it was different. And 12 months before that, it was different again.
And you just touched on my point, is the Adobe suite. What would you be doing if you didn't have Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere, After Effects? I mean, would you give those things up and go back to pen and ink and watercolors and
or code?
Acrylics? Yeah.
Because code was where it all started, where it all originated, and how things became what they are today. Actually, just by a show of hands, to John's point, for the audience, how many of you, by show of hands, have or are using AI-based tools in your daily lives. This includes ChatGPT. This includes any creative tools. This includes using them for helping you get some ideas. So I'd say we were up to at least 75 to 80% of the audience that are probably all in agreement of AI affecting their lives and now being kind of injected in the daily way that they live. And actually, to be honest with you, it's really 100% of you, because the algorithms also go the backwards way, where AI is actually feeding you the information as well. So as long as you're online in any way, in any presence, it's definitely still being affected in the decisions that you make as a human today. So I'm going to do a real quick shotgun thing real quick, okay? So Luke, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Invisibility.
All right, maybe I should rephrase that question. If you had, what is your human superpower? What do people tell you? And they're like, hey, Luke, you're outstanding at this, or...
Well, I'm Laser Luke. I think when I do visuals and lasers, I think people really connect with that, and I'm always surprised at how well people think that I'm doing. So I think that.
Okay. John, what's your human, viably doable superpower?
I don't know. Like, I like my kids, you know. It's a really funny thing because we're talking about work life and all these different things, but like a few people have said this week, my son came to visit from Savannah, Georgia. He's still living there and I've moved back to Australia. But like people said, I met your son. He's really nice. And that's the thing I'm really, I feel good about. You know, my mum said, I love your boys. You're good parents. And I'm like, huh. Of course, it's weird for your mum to say that, but so I think that's the most super thing.
David.
David always says too,
I've got
because
two
His
mics.
superpower is dual microphone
Yes,
holding. and
I can speak in stereo. I don't know if there's ever really like a number one answer. I mean, I think it'll change. You ask me the question tomorrow and I'll tell you something different.
Okay, what is it right now?
You know, right now.
At this very instant.
You know, just thinking for his question, and my question. I mean, I think of endurance or like, just persistence. Like, you know, I will keep banging my head against the wall. Why is this not working? Why is this not working? And
you proved that to me the other night.
Well, and you know, it's just
you're trying to help me troubleshoot my
Yes.
installation.
I mean, and so yeah, persistence and just, you know, I won't give up until whatever that vision is in some way satisfied.
Katsi.
this may have been the most difficult question you've ever asked, because I don't think of myself in terms of that, but I'd say creative problem solving, because that's all we've got constantly, and things you've never thought would happen will happen, and you have to come up with a solution. And it's amazing what life brings you and how you have to deal with that stuff that you never thought you would have to. There.
Devin?
It does change as you get older.
I totally agree.
I just turned 60, and I hate to even say that out loud, but I feel like I'm in my 20s. But in every decade, you think about the world differently. If there's a constant, it's curiosity. I'm just an infinitely curious person. I ask questions about everything, and lately that's turned into questions about the future. I had a Macintosh in 1984, and I knew that Mac, 512 kilobytes of memory. I knew that was the future. And so I kept pushing, like what comes next? And being an early adopter is painful. Like you're doing stuff way ahead of the mainstream. But I think it helps you embrace change.
Absolutely. So I know what you're all thinking. What is Jeff's superpower? I would say my superpower is actually also very much relatable to curiosity, but I'm actually really curious about people. I do very well with connecting to people, and I really enjoy getting to know what basically makes different people tick, and how people think and how people react to things, and what fascinates people, and watching people grow from children up into adults. And, I actually taught high school for a couple of years when I first got out of college. and I was teaching kids that were, well, I call them kids now, but they were basically 4 years younger than I was when I first started teaching high school. But the really interesting thing for me today is knowing who they were then to still being connected to them today and seeing the careers and the people that they've evolved into throughout their careers and seeing what kind of facets and what paths they've taken to get to where they have been. And even actually meeting some of their children, it's actually quite fascinating to see kind of that relationship and that full evolution of change and personality. Some people, we all click in different ways. We get along. Some of us don't get along. But it's really interesting from the human evolutionary point to see how things have changed and evolved. So yeah, I'd say that's a big rambling way to kind of give my superpower. I wanted to kind of talk about things now a little bit more on that point of the human level of, being a human and working your way through out your life, your work, your life balance. I mean, we're all human. We've all got desires. We've all got personal lives that we have aside. We've got things that we deal with from an emotional perspective. Some of us put up masks to mask out things that are actually happening behind the scenes in our lives. So I'm going to ask you, if you want to be vulnerable here, be vulnerable. But if you don't have to be. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of touch upon some of these more sensitive things about your lives and maybe some of the challenges that do come up, with a work-life balance. Like as David was mentioning earlier, when you get up to the crunch time for an event and you're going through this creative process, you can kind of just end up having to be alone for long periods of time. And I mean, even for myself and working in, live production and product design and product development and being on job sites a lot, traveling all over the world. I lived a very luxurious life and being able to travel to beautiful destinations and places that people have never been to or never dreamed of in their life. But it was just me. I was the one that was traveling, and I made friends and I made kind of travel families along the way, but those kind of come and go, and they kind of separate. And at the end of the day, it's still just me. So I'd love to hear a little bit. Just kind of, it's going to be more of a broad kind of question. Maybe you can all kind of give a little bit of feedback and a little bit of insights. And we'll just start with Luke, try and and just kind of work our way through. But it would be really interesting to kind of hear how that kind of plays out in your life, how that plays out, in what you're doing and where you're going.
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of what you're saying about traveling.
If your microphone was off, I've been rambling for way too long.
Would have just kept going, I know. The nice thing about traveling and visiting different areas is that you kind of meet your family on the road and like you end up having friends in all different places. That's what I do really like about it. Your network is just kind of all over. And, we were just at LDI. That's why we're the crown in here for those of you that saw it.
There's a whole side story to the crown.
Whole side
if you guys see the crown, ask Luke about the crown. It's a fun story.
But yeah, I think that's what I do really enjoy just about this kind of crazy work life is that you travel around, you get to see really nice things.
So how do you balance that between your family life and your professional life? I know that your dad's here, so you've already got one really great connection between family support.
For sure, yeah, and that's been really cool. We can kind of collaborate year to year. I think he's been coming 4 years, so it's got to see what I've been working on, and then how we can work together. And in the future too, I want to collaborate potentially with more artists at DG, because I'm usually building kind of interactive installation pieces, and sometimes I just want something that looks really beautiful up there, and I might not always be the first to make that, but kind of doing the interactivity. I think that's all I'll say.
John, how about you? I know right now, especially you've now moved back from Savannah to Australia.
To Australia, yeah. I think, look, the big question for artists is always, how do I balance creativity and a creativity which might not always be well compensated? Like, what do you do in order to produce your work? And there are a number of questions to this, and you can be jealous of people who seem to be successful in your field. And it's like, well, they're making money. Maybe I should emulate that. But quite often there's a reason for that. Like I have a lot of people who, come to the festival and they go, I'm going to find out all about this. And they come back a year later and they're like, have you heard of Refik Anadol? And I'm like, yeah, yeah. It's a kind of 101 question of like, I saw this artist and it was, and good luck to Refik. He's like the top NFT. He's made millions from producing, I don't know, if you want to buy an NFT, go ahead. Particle systems. It's like Houdini work. And people go, it looks so cool. But anyone who knows what it is like, and there's a lot of rhetoric around that stuff, but it's successful. So you have to kind of step back from that and think, what does this process, like genuinely the process of creativity, what am I solving? What questions are happening here? And I see that in a lot of, all the artists here, very different responses to those questions, but they might not be well compensated. To make work is sometimes a lonely and unforgiving process. So you've got this question of, okay, how do I sustain my life? Do I teach? Do I do some sort of commercial practice? And I think that bridge is really a hard one to negotiate because you're negotiating a constantly changing and very quickly changing industrial landscape now, where the kinds of work that you might do in 1 year will change 2 years later. They're completely unrecognizable. So, I used to teach at the National Film School in Australia, and I had a lot of people that would leave, and I'd say, so what are you going to do? And they say, I'm going to make a feature. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. What sort of budget are you thinking? They go, 10 million. I'm like, great. Now I could buy a house in Sydney and it's going to make like 10% a year. I could park that 10 million. It's $11 million the year after at least. Or I could give you 10 million. And I'm likely to lose it.
You could give me 10 million.
No, but I mean, and I said, so when do you think that'll happen? They said, it'll take me about a year and a half. So I'm just going to direct commercials in the meantime. And it was this idea, I'd been to film school and I just walked in and people say, okay, make your first film. Here's all the equipment. And they were like, this is easy. And there are people who make commercials who do nothing but that. There are people who they make car commercials or they make hair commercials. And I can tell you the person who's going to make the next Sunsilk TVC is someone who did the last one, who's really good at like that glossy flow of hair. If anyone's been to Asia, you go anywhere in Southeast Asia or India, and there's a shot in the hair commercial, which is like, this is what your hair will look like. There's someone who, that's their job. There are food stylists. There are people who are so detailed in what they do. And it's hard to be kind of intra-competitive unless that's your complete focus all the time. So I think for a lot of artists, the question is we have these incredibly negotiable skills and we're good at making things, and we coincidentally become very proficient at a lot of the practices of bringing things into life. And that's a big question about how you find a commercial outlet for that and the connectivity to do that, which doesn't eat you up and mean that you don't see your friends, you're not doing your art, and you're working on, and there's a triangle of like being a good person, having a life and growing up always, you're always doing that, and then making your work and then kind of feeding yourself. And I think that balance is something, I really respect the way people do it, but it's something you're constantly negotiating, you're constantly doing. And I say, to be really frank, I will put out, I think I need to do some sort of gainful employment, and I'll put in some job applications for jobs I'll see in Sydney. I won't even get a reply. And it's like, those things are so well within my capabilities, but you can't, it's just not an easy thing, because maybe the person reading that is, I don't know, I don't really bother about it too much, but that can be discouraging if you're younger and you're starting out and you're sort of getting these knockbacks. And I'm just like, I don't care. It's not a problem, but it's tough. It's not like students say to me when I was teaching, they'd say, oh, do you know anyone who's hiring in Chicago? It's like, not really. I can give you some suggestions, but it's not a magic carpet. I can't just make that happen for her. And I think David's
it's actually
question
interesting that you bring that
about
up.
Grit is really important, because that's a big part of it. You're kind of constantly having to go back to all these different fields and persist, because that process of deliberative labor is persistent.
Actually, let's touch on that because David's got a pretty interesting background too. He works as a creative director in TV and film, and I've known you as a screens producer as well, and I've known you as a creative artist and a content. Well, maybe I should not use that word. Creative media producer.
Well, I prefer dynamic media synthesis.
Okay, well, let's go with that then. What he said.
So I think I'm going to divert a little bit back to where you had started with this. So I'm married. I have a 17-year-old daughter and I have a 2-year-old daughter. So I've kind of got a lot of different levels of demand. Well, demand is not the right word, but it's where I need to be a different person at a different time. And I think, like you said, there's this creative impulse that you can't escape from. But you can't always sort of
you have to put it back.
Put it anywhere. And sort of returning to like the beginning as a new parent being older, I think in this balance, it can be lonely. You're borrowing from every mode when you're working. Like everything else can shut down. I mean, at least for me, like I'm one thing at a time, single track focus. And so, you always have to return and be present in those other spaces, like you're investing in your future or you're investing in your support or those around you. You're sort of being patient with your absence. But then I think also in the balance, like technology has really sort of helped with that, like being remote places and having video calls, like to connect with, if anything good came out of the COVID experience, like everybody understanding and being able to connect to Zoom. I mean, like all of my international friendships, like, I just have a Zoom call and, I feel like I'm as close as I ever was or closer just because of, now,
It's the attention.
Yeah.
You have one-on-one, completely diverted or devoted, focused attention.
Yeah, well, and it's great because you're no longer sort of in one space, but you're pulled together, and I think that's one way of kind of being more present, even when you're unable to sort of physically occupy the same space. And I don't know. Also. Sort of going back to the being a new parent again, part of it, like, having the desire of, I want to sit at a computer for 12 hours straight, doesn't exist anymore. And, half of the compromise there is, sleep goes away and, work all night and then sort of be on parent duty should that arise. And, but then, I think also I like, the challenge of solving that in a different way. Like, how can I continue working but not be at a computer? And realizing that the phone in my pocket is a powerful supercomputer, and how to sort of interface with that. It's like, all right, same skills, just different way of getting to them. And I think coming to your question of like the using the AI in a way, like the vibe coding thing is awesome. Like that's just all right, one way of I'm here and I can
magic.
get a visual result, and but then just sort of using the experience of everything that but just, you're now taking it out of your head, describing it to an AI, and then telling the AI, well, you did it wrong here, and here. And I think I don't know, technology in some ways is still human. Somebody made it and put all of their essence into it. It's been filtered to behave a certain way, and then you're interacting with it and shaping it. And I feel like machines have a great power to teach, and it's not necessarily the machine, but it's the people that made the machine and the people that use the machine that you're really it's connecting you across time and space in a different way. And you may never talk to the person who made ChatGPT, but you're still talking to them sort of in a removed sense. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of an enabler in some ways for these like it is not the result. It is just the a connection. I don't know. So maybe I didn't answer your question.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
you did.
I went somewhere over there.
That's totally fine. But you absolutely did. Katsi?
I yield the mic.
Thank you. So I'm also a mother of two, and it took up some time to raise the children, for sure. And I'm married to an artist who works in the industry. So it's lately, since the children are older, we had the opportunity to collaborate. And if any one of you ever worked with a significant other, it is a interesting process, right? Because he has a vision and I have a vision, and it doesn't always meet exactly. But just recently I was able to do a duo with him, just really a huge learning experience, because he paints, and he painted paintings with space for projections. So I projected beautiful patterns and things that I thought was representational. In fact, speaking of AI, right, I took his painting, fed it into the system, and created visuals that still worked with the colors. They were initiated by the paint splashes, and we had so many technical problems. It's not even funny, projectors that were really old, and there's no lens shift on them, or there's a manual lens shift, but the projector is way, way up there, and so I'm not climbing up. And then if I do want to climb up, who's going to have the ladder to climb? It's just crazy. And also just this idea, like, I think it looks cool. And he's like, no. And I'm like, but I do think it looks cool. And at some point I had to map blind, because we had to hide the computer in the back. The gallery had the paintings. And he had to tell me, because he had these little things that had to be just so, right? He had to tell me, and two to the right, and one to the left. And I'm like, what? You just told me to go to the right. Why are we going left? The fact that we are still married is just a miracle. and I still love him, and we respect each other. But this is the way for me to connect my family. I also drag my children around. The poor things had to go to all kinds of events, and I do not do the iPad situation, so they actually had to watch. And last year I brought my daughter, and she almost cried this year when she couldn't come, because she had another thing to do, because it was so amazing for her to be here. So I'm trying to mix them in. There's no way to step away from it. Like, I'm the mom. I still get messages. Literally today I got a message, Mom, where are my dotted shirts? Where's my shirt? And I'm like, how the hell would I know that? I'm in another state. I don't know. You're 17. It's in your closet. That's the answer, right? But I get this all the time.
It's in your laundry hamper.
Yeah, apparently. So that's just part of everything. And all of us have to do this to have families. It's just, yeah. And they always text when you're in the middle of something extremely important, like in the middle of a lecture, and I get these desperate messages about cat food or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I can't answer that right now. I'm sorry. So yeah, that's the balance. There's no balance. It's wash over.
Constant.
It's a mix.
Devin, how about you? Being a serial entrepreneur and
Oh, yeah,
working,
you
and
can imagine. Do teenagers use hampers? I just thought
no, they use
my teenagers threw stuff on the floor.
They think it's called the floor.
Yeah, the carpet was the hamper. Yeah, training. So I've had the luxury of listening and having time to process ideas. So I have three different perspectives to answer your question: a business, a family relationship, and really a spiritual kind of thought. One of my companies was venture backed. We venture capitalists love to give you money, but they love big returns. So you work a lot of crazy hours. And I have two sons that are now in their late 20s. But there was a period when I was in my 30s that I would sleep at the office. I'd go home for dinner, have dinner with the family, at least 5 nights a week, and then I'd go back and work till midnight or 1 a.m. or sometimes, we were doing 3D modeling and rendering, and the machine had to render all night, and you had to check for error. So I had no work-life balance in my 30s. But that leads me to the family part. I have an incredible wife, so if you have I don't know why this is emotional. If you have a partner, my wife is kind of like an angel. It makes everything easier because they I think they understand you and know that you have to do what you're saying. You have to create. So support is just a gift. And it can come from friends. I have a lot of friends that support me, encourage me. So without that, you're always, you're probably living a fraction of your potential. It takes another human to make this human all it can be. And
That's a great.
I think it does. And
That's a great phrase.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the way we're wired as a species. We need each other, and that kind of leads to the spiritual aspect of my whole life. You know, I love to question things, so I'm questioning, how a mobile app works, or a website, or some of these projection rigs. But I'm also questioning, who am I, and why am I here, and what is my purpose? And so I went down the religious route in my early years. So there's an organized religion to try to find answers, and then I went down a spiritual route. And I've read so many books about the meaning of life, and ancient books. And I've gotten to the point where I think the breakthrough for me, and maybe I'm a little older than some of you, but the breakthrough was realizing that this voice in my head that now I really classify as my ego, it has a purpose of just mostly solving problems, but the ego likes to create problems so it can solve problems. And then there's this voice for me for most of my life that was always, am I good enough? Is this, am I worthy? And it was expressing itself in a business success, or making money, or creating things that people used or liked. But then hopefully at some point in your life, you get to the point where you realize you are part of all that is. And by definition, you're perfect. And so the only judge is the judge in your head. And so I think that has enabled me to think about creative things, building. I'm not building. My earliest career, I was a home builder. I'm not building with lumber and bricks. I'm building with software, but I can build and think with freedom, because whatever I do is good enough. It's an expression, and I should be the only one that judges myself, because in reality, nobody else. No one else thinks about the critique the way you do. So the freedom of letting go and saying, whatever I do, I put out into the world, and that is good enough. That's liberating. And I don't know that I've perfected it, but I know I've gotten better at it than any point in my life.
I think that's a great way to conclude this. So at this point, I'd love to open up the floor for questions from you guys, from the audience. I would ask that if you do have a question, if you could just come up to the stage, because I don't know if we have microphones that are floating. But yeah, I'd love to open up the floor to anybody that might have any questions for the next few minutes, and then we'll conclude and allow you guys to freely ask questions to any of the panelists. I was going to say, if I had a way of creating an analog AI right now, I would just ask all the panelists to start asking each other questions, and I'd just leave. And the panel would be done, so my job would be automatically... Yeah, that would be the problem.
Jeffrey, I just wanted to add to what he was saying a minute ago before we get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think in kind of the spirit of work-life balance, like being an artist, in some ways you present yourself as like an independent individual entity capable of all this great creation. And really, like, every artist here is supported in some way. And I think that work-life balance comes from those around you, like giving you the support to succeed in ways where you fall short. And I think the emotion of it, like, I feel that for real, because if I didn't have a wife that cares and daughters that care, I mean, I brought my daughter here the first 3 years that I came, and she's sad every time she misses it from now on. And I think it's those around that really, like, sort of give you the ability to exist in the way that you do. And so, I mean,
You're
I think
absolutely
that's
right.
It's not in the individual where the balance comes from, but your surroundings.
I was going to say, my very first year coming here, I was invited just to kind of come and observe. And that weekend, I had at the time my 4-year-old daughter, and I was a little worried about bringing her up to a festival like this, where she had never been exposed to anything along these lines, and to kind of come into a very, very visually stimulating environment, and still be able to have the conversations that I needed to have with the people I needed to speak to while I was here, and to still kind of get my job done. And at the time, there was a lovely lady named Tracy Osterman who was working as part of the people that were handling some of the sponsorships. And she did a wonderful job in just kind of taking my daughter kind of off of, I hate to use that expression, but off my hands for, an hour or so. But the thing that ended up happening that I didn't expect, which was quite remarkable, was my daughter her eyes just opened super wide, and she just kind of started just taking everything in, and she just kind of just went on her own little journey as a 4-year-old, but she didn't require any real hand holding, she just kind of ran around a little bit and absorbed things, and Tracy was there to observe and kind of watch over her, but it was amazing just to see that experience. And my point being is she's 15 years old today, and she still, to this day, remembers those moments, and she still asks about this festival. She hasn't been since, and I've been trying to get her back because I'd really love to see how she views it today compared to the memories that she had when she was really little. But she still, to this day, it was a huge point. Whenever I say I'm doing digital graffiti, she's like, "Oh, how's the crew doing? And how are the art pieces?" And she's like asking all these questions. But the only kind of memories that she has are those of her being really little, and she hasn't had any exposure since. So it's really interesting from that aspect in that regard. All right.
Hi, my name is Barbara. I flew in from California because my very good friend of mine lives here now in Florida. And she said, this is an amazing exhibit. And she said, I have to come. So I flew in just for 2 days to see this exhibit. And I just want to tell you, it's absolutely fascinating just to listen to the walk last night and to listen to this, and we'll be here probably at 2:00 to see, to listen again. And I just wanted to know, tell me about your family life, your mom and your dad. How did they support you in going into the arts? Because, there's a lot of suffering artists out there that don't make enough money to make a life for themselves or a life for a family. So I'm just wondering, how did your family support you? Your mom and dad, are they in the arts? Did they help you? No? They didn't support you?
I grew up in a single parent. My mother was 18 when she had me in the 60s, Catholic girl, so she had the baby. And abusive relationship, so that lasted about 6 months. And we grew up in public housing. And my milieu in Sydney is, I'd say, quite upper middle class, but much of the fancy parts of town are very close to the public housing that I used to live in when I was a kid. In fact, I can see it from my house now. So it's a big gap. But then, I kind of left home at 18. I had a very, I would say, unpleasant stepfather, who I sort of tried to connect with, couldn't. And so for me, my parents moved away when I left school, like the week I left school, and I kind of left home at the same time and made my own way. And I think it's a really good question, because there's this idea that somehow you grow up nurtured into this work, or it's something about nurture. And for me, it was really a deliberative process of saying, how do I want to be as a person? And I really, I went to school, I studied law for a couple of years. I was like, no, I'm not going to be a lawyer. It's just not going to be the thing. And I started making videos with a friend, Andrew, and we met in a media, communications class. I said, I want to do more of this. And he said, yeah, me too, I want to make features. Now, Andrew's made 8 feature films many, many years later. But to David's point of persistence, between when he uttered those words and making his first one, it was a 26-year gap, and he never lost sight of that thing. So, we set up a kind of group of people at college. We asked the college, could they take videos and play them in the union building, and so every month we'd make a program, put them on the network, and it's a kind of a sort of almost like an entrepreneurial way of going out and saying, how do we connect all the stuff? We're all kind of dyed our hair different colors, and went out to a lot of the live music events and things, and we kind of had a very DIY aesthetic, but we wanted to connect that to what other people in the college saw or did. And so that concept, I want to go back to my first comment of connectivity. It's, for me, all of this work is a way of connecting you to thinking through, and if you're genuinely self-critical or self-reflective about what you do and you refine it, it's a way of connecting back to yourself. Or it may be a way of seeing that in someone else and helping them connect what they're doing to something else. So my parents were not like into art, and my mum's always like, it's so crazy what you do, but so I think that's, and to an extent, that sounds like, I just pulled it out of a hat, but I think everyone does. You could grow up in the most artistic household, but it's never going to help you on that journey. So I think to that point, every person who does this work must bridge the point between possibility and actuality, and that journey between something not being there and being there it's a very different thing for every person. But I think that's the big part of the thing, that you can have those familial mentors, but quite often it's people you meet along the way, and it's how you respond to that helps you articulate it.
I think you're right, because I think it's not even a question of how you were raised or the influence of how you were raised from your family, but it's more about the question of when the opportunity came along and what point or what time in your life that happened. Because I'm a little bit opposite. I actually had a really great upbringing. I come from a middle class family, and my dad was very hardworking, electrical engineer for a long time, and my mom was basically a stay-at-home family mom, and she was an artist herself. She did oil painting, did some really, really beautiful works as she was at home, and she had those liberties, which was absolutely amazing. But for me, I got into theater, and I got into theater in high school, and it was a complete fluke. I had a really good friend of mine whose cousin was the technical director of the theater program in our high school, and he was graduating that year, and he had nobody to replace him. So he called me up that weekend and said, "Hey, I've got pizza, and I might be able to give you a few beers on the side." And I was 16, so I thought it was super cool. Well, let me just tell you, drinking age in Quebec is 18 years old. But that's how I got into it. So I went into the theater that weekend and started helping them, hang lights. And I didn't know anything about electricity. I knew nothing about lighting. I really knew nothing about any of it. But I absolutely just fell in love with it. And from that point forward, that was it. And for me, my parents were supportive, but they were supportive in the way of saying, do what you want to do with your life. But they didn't, continually push, or they allowed us to be fluid thinking and fluid moving. So if there was something that we were passionate one day and we tried it and we didn't like it, then that's okay. We just kind of moved on to the next thing. But theater was my catalyst, and to this day I miss it so dearly. I always dream about getting back into it. But to our conversation earlier, as artists and starving artists still with the theater scene, it's extremely difficult to make a livelihood out of it unless you get to places like Broadway, for example, or you get into some of the bigger areas that are much more funded and have the funding to support you.
But I wanted to add to this because I teach, and it's a community college where students really often come without a direction, and they accidentally take my class and then they find themselves in it or not, which is also cool. But I also come from more of a broken family. I have great parents, but they died while I was really young. So I think the key for me, that's how I see the world, is just let your kids do what they want to do, speaking on what Jeff was saying, because I think that's why I could become who I am, because I was let to do what I wanted to do. And I had to find my way, and that was the only way. Because if you tell me what to do, I don't want to do it. Some people want to, I'm not. So it was beautiful that I was just let go, and I took chances, and I obviously doors close and then windows open, and yes, you have to meander your way to be comfortable with who you are, and I think that's the key. And it's beautiful not to care, right? About anything really, because if you like what you're doing, then you're successful. And all of us are doing so many different things, and I think our approach is incredibly different. Our pipeline is different, our way of being inspired is different, but we are comfortable with what we do.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you to the panelists for the great morning here. I'm Dane Howard, one of the artists, and I identified a lot with the journey of understanding the difficulties of coming up with an idea or working through technology, work-life balance, of course. These are things that, as an artist, that come at you. But then I really like the balance of those that surround you, like the family. And I think, like, my son will be here during the show, and he just graduated college in design, so it's such a wonderful thing to be able for him to see it. And my family loves me and supports me at the same time that they quite don't understand exactly me. So you get the support, but then not the understanding. Does that make sense? But I just want to make a comment around generosity, because I have worked for 25 years in tech and design and art, and I bump up across sometimes mentalities where they're less generous, and they feel like when you talk to them, you might be taking their mind share or taking something away from them. But it's always those that are really generous in showing you how, like you mentioned, you like to collaborate. It's this idea of generosity, and I see that and I sense that in this festival, and that in its history. It came across in some of John's comments yesterday. But if you could make some comments about how humans are generous to other humans, despite the fact that they create, because that, whenever I've felt it, it's like wind at my sails, because all of a sudden someone gets you, and they're generous in their creativity, in showing you how to do something, how to introduce you to someone. But anyway, I just got that tone from Devin's piece, so I just wanted to thank you and just see if you had some thoughts on that.
I'd love to actually just kind of take that on. And this has been mentioned in the past, and it was actually a question that came up last night, actually, while I was out and about. And it's a great question, and it really kind of makes you think. But it starts to make you think about what is different about this experience. What is different about digital graffiti that makes it different than anything else? And the thing that I find the core of it that makes it so much different is that you're all here. The artists are here. You're physically present, and you have it becomes a sense of community. And I think that's one of the biggest and most beautiful parts of digital graffiti is a lot of artists work independently, or they might work with a small team or a group of people, but you're kind of sandboxed a lot of the time. You don't have an opportunity to really get out and meet other artists that are doing different things, that have different processes, that are creating in different ways. And even just being able to get to know them, to hang out with them, you're creating almost another family of support, and they understand you as opposed to anybody else. They are able to relate and understand how you think, how you're processing, what you're going through. Because I think from an artist's perspective, even though you might have different procedures, there's there's a lot of similarity in the ways that you relate and the ways that you can admire and respect each other. Even though if you don't completely agree with maybe their artistic vision or the direction they're going, or how maybe some very minute things that they want don't really compute to yourself because you're like, nobody's ever going to notice that. But the point being is that you've got community here. You've got a group of people that are all like-minded and that are passionate and that understand and that are here to support. And, when you are having the roughest of times or the most frustrating moments where you might be trying to work something out, another artist might come along and be like, hey, I'm here and I see you're having a rough time. Let me help you, and it's just that's magical. That's something that you just don't find in any of these other festivals. I mean, you do to some regards, but there's a lot of them that are not as free as you are here. You might be working on a bigger festival where the pieces are commissioned, right? So you're still working, but you're working again with your team. You kind of sandbox. You're working on one thing. And so I think commercialization sometimes commercialization can be an art killer in my mind. You need the money, but when it becomes commercialized, you're really tightly locked into your deliverables. And this is kind of no pressure. It's organic. It's just it flows.
I'm going to say that generosity is a really important part of the festival. Like, there's a lot of theories about what we produce in society, what we create. And I really like a French philosopher, Georges Bataille, who looked at it from the position of surplus, that most of our activities are actually to produce some kind of surplus. And people are very generous about the surplus they produce. It's sort of freely given in the way that they kind of share their work and they share it with each other. I think this question of family and how you connect with people is not about, oh, my parents did this to me, because that's definitely one part of that, but it can be a group of people you meet or the people you hang around with. I know some of the artists went and had a late pasta dinner last night. They finished up, got everything done and said, let's fill our tummies together. And that's really beautiful, because like sharing a meal or cooking together or just being part of that, group. One of the people who has come for a few years and couldn't come this year said, I'm upset because it's like summer camp. I go and I see all my friends from last year. I see all these people. And for me, that's a really good thing, that generosity is also something where the people who come love that. And they're going to, I know every artist will have dozens of conversations with people that pass by their work, or, it's not just one thing. And that's the kind of totality of, there's all these different things going on which you can't possibly keep track of. They're very individual to the person, but I think that sense of everyone giving something and sharing something, that makes people more open to keep sharing. I've always found the best, mentors are peer mentors, the people who say, how did you do that? What did you, oh, I did this, and that's, I feel that's definitely part of the sensation here.
I have a thought about that, obviously. I think it's mindset. I think a lot of us, Americans maybe, or global citizens, there is a prevalence of a mindset of scarcity. This is mine, that's yours, and we're taught that as children. Like I remember my little kids playing in a sandbox, like this is my truck, and they'd get in fights over toys. But in essence, I
still get into fights over toys.
There's another dozen toys in the sandbox. I mean, there's plenty to go around. Energy. I'm looking outside at the sunny day. There's an energy abundance of solar energy. We just don't tap into it. So, and this whole abundance thing is radically changing as disruptive technology happens. But I remember many years ago, I went to a lot of marketing conferences that were at executive level, like vice president, CEO level. And they would always have a roundtable discussion, and they were nervous about talking about their business because they didn't want their competitor to know what they were doing. So it was that, that mindset of scarcity. And then my good friend, his name's Terry Weaver, he facilitated this event, and he always said, if each of you, this was usually like a roundtable of 10 people, he said, if each of you will give up your very, very best idea in your company, your organization, the thing that makes you more successful, if you give up one of your best ideas, if all of you do that, then the other 9 people are going to give up their best ideas, and you give up one, but you get 9. And I thought, that's so simple. It's such simple math. And so that goes back to giving. Lately I've been kind of obsessed with Da Vinci. So whether it's Da Vinci or Franklin or even Steve Jobs, all these people were building things, creating things that we have all been building on top of. Like everything seems to be additive. Like it's hard to come up with the first time anybody's done something. We're always complimenting at that work. So it truly is, this is kind of mystical or magical, in the right circumstances, 1 + 1 can equal 3. And you just need that environment and the people. And it's beautiful when you're around like-minded people let's be honest, it's love. Like if you just love other people, you don't care about yourself. So I think there was a Coca-Cola commercial in the 80s. All you need is love, right? Remember that commercial? Maybe we're moving back to that. Maybe more people are waking up to that's the only thing that matters. Everything else comes and goes.
I think on that note, that's a great way to conclude our panel. It's all about love. So a huge thank you to our panelists for being here today. And I do want to give Alys Beach a huge shout out for producing this event, for having faith in the artists and in our curator, our fearful leader, John, and for just supporting the arts and putting forth the effort in producing an event like this. It's something that's sensational and something that you're just not going to experience anywhere else. So I absolutely want to give Alys Beach just a tremendous, huge, heartfelt thank you for helping and for doing this. It's just incredible.